Hey, Bobby Manning here. Welcome to a Wednesday edition of the Garden Report here with Justin Rowan after another fun Celtics Cavs matchup. And I know you're going to love it, Justin. I know you probably loved it last night. But we spoke early yesterday afternoon, and you weren't feeling great about their chances going into this one. So a pleasant
Or
surprise
no.
for you. An unpleasant surprise for Celtics fans who watched this game into the early portion of the fourth quarter, thinking it was going to be another step in this parade of blowouts. And that's what it was with about 9 minutes to go here, 20-point game. And you saw a combination of an out-of-this-world offensive explosion by the Cavs and really this offensive low by Boston that you hadn't seen all year. I mean, I pulled up the fourth quarter shot chart once the game was done. And it was shocking to see they didn't make a single jump shot in the fourth quarter of the
Oh my
Celtics,
goodness.
other than just that little like flip shot by Porzingis. I think it was over Niang there, which was a tough shot in and of itself. So this was a wacky one. I think a lot of people are looking at it, at least from a Boston standpoint, and saying a little bit of an aberration, how this one ended here. Not really a panic button kind of loss yet, especially after 11 straight wins.
Yeah.
But it wasn't pretty, and the Cavs needed this, as you just said to me off the air, so they can have it, I guess, for now. But it does raise, if you're the Celtics here, and in this matchup, as I'm sure we'll get into, concerns about some past issues with the team that I think are still holding a lot of Celtics observers back from picking what obviously looks like the best team in the NBA from being that slam dunk favorite as champion this year. So where do you start with this one? It was a weird one.
I'm going to start by making fun of you guys. I'm going to make fun of you guys a little bit and not for the reason you think. Anyone that's overreacting to this game, I think, is insane. Anyone that is being like, oh, like that crunch time kind of stuff, honestly, it makes me feel a little bit better because that kind of stuff comes up for the Cavs fairly frequently. And when you see it happen to a team that's as good as the Boston Celtics, like, it's just kind of a reminder that, oh, it's not just always picking on the low markets. It happens to everybody. The Cavs probably won that game because of the injuries that they had. Realistically, I don't think Boston came out with as much focus as they normally would, especially for a national TV game. Coming off a big win, no Donovan Mitchell. Evan Mobley gets hurt in the third. They go up by 22. You're feeling comfortable and you take your foot off the gas.
By
That
the way,
happened.
what a Cavaliers injury on a dunk.
You know what? And I can't. It's just been that way this year. I can't even someone commented, they're like, how can that happen on an open dunk? I can't really talk because I tore my Achilles
I
on
was
an
just
open
gonna
hook shot.
say,
Yeah,
among
I
all the
tore.
Cavs injuries, I see a crutch behind you.
Yeah, I'm currently battling through a torn Achilles right now, so my basketball career is behind me. But yeah, like honestly, like this kind of stuff happens. Like it's funny because I feel like the Cavs were coming off a loss where this exact same thing occurred, where they're fired up, they're going to play the Knicks, even though the Knicks are shorthanded. Jalen Brunson gets hurt on the first shot of the game, and then the place just goes flat. Like the team loses all energy. They get out to a halftime lead, but they think, okay, like we've kind of got this one in the bag. And they talked about it after the game. It was a parallel to what happened with Boston. And you listen to the interviews with the Celtics players after the game. They understand that this was them beating themselves more than the Cavs. Credit to Cleveland for competing, not quitting, taking advantage of the opportunity. But the door was opened by the Celtics, and I don't think that this is something you can take like a macro takeaway from, because you're not going to be playing in these type of situations when you get to the postseason. So I think anyone that's kind of overreacting to this, all due respect, but you're being dorks about it. This Boston Celtics team is the best team in the NBA, and frankly, the expectation should be that this team is going to be hoisting the Larry O'Brien Trophy come June.
Yeah, and you look at the matchups in the East, they're starting to dwindle in terms of the stuff that scares you here. And I've said for a while that I do think the Celtics are going to win the East. But, I've long had an interest in the Cavs as a fellow contender here. And, it didn't start great this year. Injuries part of that, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
but they explode into 2024 here, emerge as that real 2-seed contender alongside Milwaukee. And they competed well in those December games at the Garden there. It was still a period where the Celtics just had that late separation in them
Yep.
in those games and looked a level above them. But in this game, I think you saw it go back to some of those matchups we saw early last year. And again, completely different team. Even in this one, Porzingis made a big difference in the touches he did get down the stretch. The pass to Holiday backdoor, the finish I mentioned, the little hook shot that was their only shot beyond the rim that they made in that fourth quarter, and then the transition and one, which easily could have won the game. So that's still a real difference here. But man, you look at the last couple possessions, especially the way the Cavaliers are into the bodies, the way they're navigating the screens out there. I love the way JB used Niang just kind of roving around the rim away from Cornette early in the fourth. I thought that was a big reason the game changed early in that period. The Celtics just couldn't get to the rim there with too many guys clogging it up. So they're a real deal defense. And, they had a bad matchup in the playoffs last year against the Knicks. A bunch of stuff went wrong there. But if they can find a way into a series and some close games with the Celtics, and that's the tough part, right? Because the Celtics are just kind of running away from everybody in a lot of these games. If you can get it down to that crunch time, as you mentioned, I was one of the people who looked at the crunch time stats, 18-9, ton of wins this year, huge net rating, and said, all right, they figured it out. But credit to Chris Forsberg over at NBC, who took a deeper dive at it and found 4-6 in the last minute of 1-point games, 2-5 in the last 10 seconds of 1-point games, which is tied for 24th, and this being the latest loss there. Tatum's 1-6 in those situations, and it feels like he just kind of automatically gets the ball each time in those scenarios. So I'm weighing in this one. I'm not panicking about the collapse. It was obviously an aberration when Dean Wade starts raining down from three. But that crunch time finish in the last minute or two there wasn't pretty for the offense, and the Cavaliers really made them stagnant.
Yeah, and there's some parallels there. Like I think one of the hurdles that the Cavs need to overcome, and you see it in some games, but you don't see it in all of them, is when it gets to crunch time, making sure you're still moving the offense, that guys are going off ball, that even if the end result is going to be kind of a one-on-one possession, you want it coming off an action where a guy's, attacking a destabilized defense and making them work. I understand the tendency for teams to go a little more isolation heavy in the clutch because there's less likelihood of a turnover that goes for 2 points the other way and the whole variety of factors. But that's always one of the toughest things when you're talking about a team like the Celtics, who was young and has continued to kind of have a lot of that internal growth along with the very shrewd moves they've made from a team building standpoint. And then the Cavs, who are trying to go on that same path, is you're always going to fall on some of those old habits when it's high pressure moments and when it's in the clutch. And you just hope that, over a larger sample, that those instances become less and less frequent. And, I'm ultimately not really worried about it, but with Boston, but yeah, I feel like, I feel like the Cavs could at least be competitive in a series and not get outclassed like they did against the Knicks. To me, that's the biggest goal, is winning a round of the playoffs and then showing you belong against these top teams. Because if that's the case and you lose, let's say, 6 competitive games and you steal a couple and but you feel good like you're there, you can say, okay, well, Evan Mobley's still 22 years old. Darius 23, Okoro 23. We have a first round pick. We have our mid-level exception. We have avenues to get better. Jared Allen's 25. We can take these minor steps towards becoming a contender through our internal growth and some of the flexibility that we have. If you get completely outclassed, that's when those existential questions come in about, does the 2 big lineup work? Does the 2 guard lineup work? All that kind of stuff, right? That to me, and honestly, it's my biggest fear right now is that, with Mitchell and Mobley missing some serious time here, is that they're just not going to get a chance to be healthy at any point of the season and develop that kind of second nature chemistry that you need to execute at that high level when you get to the playoffs.
Yeah, and that was the most shocking thing about this one is, once Mobley goes down, you think you're going to have that chance to separate late and to maintain that lead. And like you said earlier, that's probably the biggest reason they slipped up a bit there.
Yeah.
Joe, being Joe, didn't call any
seriously,
timeouts.
The Cavs
Didn't
have
get the
done the same
starters
thing.
back in.
Cavs have
Yeah.
done the same thing. Like, you look at their record, they're 15-18 against teams above 500. But if you look at like cleaning the glass against top 10 teams in net rating, they're actually fifth. Then you go, or I think they're actually fourth after last night, but then you go to the middle 10, they go down to ninth. You go to the bottom 10, it's 13th. They play down to their competition, and that 15-18 record is skewed by 4 losses against the Knicks without the Knicks, 2 against Philly without Embiid. They beat Philly with Embiid without Donovan Mitchell in Philadelphia earlier the year, but then they drop 2 against the shorthanded team, and then they lose to Miami without Bam and Tyler Hero. You win those 4 games and you take care of business and don't come out flat in those games, all of a sudden, you have a 19-14 record against winning teams and you look a whole lot better, right? So that's one of those things where when the Cavs are at their best, they win because of how hard they play and the way they execute. Like, you talk about what they're able to do defensively. They don't have elite defensive personnel at every single position, but Garland competes hard on the defensive end. Mitchell has committed to that end. Max Strus has taken strides forward. And then you have, guys like Dean Wade, who's a stout defender that contributes. George Niang plays good positional defense. Karis LeVert is committed to that end. Mobley and Allen, Isaac Okoro, obviously those are kind of your best defenders, but it's everyone else that commits and does their part. When they're not playing hard and they think, oh, we're just going to out-talent teams, they don't have the talent to get away with that in today's NBA. So I think that's just kind of one of those learning curve things that I'm interested to keep an eye on. But when you're shorthanded, you don't get lulled into that sense of security, like we're just going to out-talent teams. So I think that, along with an easy schedule, helped the Cavs survive the Mobley and Mitchell injury. We'll see if they're Mobley and Garland injury, I should say. We'll see if they're able to play hard and kind of stay afloat in the stretch without 2 of their core 4 again.
Yeah, and at least projecting out to playoff basketball, this had that kind of feel to it. They allowed some real physicality late. Like I keep mentioning that Porzingis play, Niang there, just incredibly physical on that play, able to bother Porzingis, and he still somehow threw it up over his head and in somehow. I love the mix of defensive looks they threw at Boston there. You had Allen switching out sometimes, staying with Tatum on that little post leaner. Thought that was a good stop for them down the stretch. They just piled them up, whether it was having that 5-man kind of show up on the screen and, not really let Porzingis get into the post. A lot of times, like White, he threw up a little lefty layup hook that missed. And, he got slowed down on that drive just because the guy around the screen kind of came up and showed a little bit in that spot. Showed some doubles. The last possession on Tatum, really good stuff, especially when he has Garland lined up like that. And, it was a controversial finish. The last 2-minute report did just come out about an hour ago, and they confirmed the challenge, the successful challenge there that said no foul on Garland on that spot. And, jump ball, correct call in that spot, as well as the time expiring on the 0.7 off the tip-off there. So there was no time to call a timeout. So everything correct down the stretch there, except for the Tatum goaltending call with 2 minutes left on Garland's missed free throw. So the only thing that went against, or the only thing wrong from that last 2 minutes there was against the Cavs. Went against the Cavs. So nothing really there to complain about from an officiating standpoint. I know some people were mad that the Porzingis putback wasn't allowed to follow through there, but there wasn't going to be enough time if the ball actually bounced off the back of the rim.
Right. Yeah. The clock, it expired.
It stopped.
Before it left his hands, and you stop playing after the whistle goes. Right. When you get the whistle and Garland goes, everyone turns and you look at what happens. Right. So, I totally get that. I will say one thing I've really enjoyed, and I've noticed it, consistently since the All-Star break, is officials are allowing people to be more physical defensively. I think you're almost seeing a ramp up to playoff style basketball, and scoring has been down across the league.
Is that a little bit of a follow to that All-Star conversation? Just the way the offense was running wild.
And here's the thing, that is all I want to see. I want defenders to be entitled to their space, to be allowed to be a little more physical, like a FIBA style. That's all that's needed. I've seen people say, get rid of the corner 3, raise the rim, all these wacky gimmick type crap. I don't want that. I don't want to change how basketball looks to try to artificially bring down scoring. the offensive players are so talented, the teams are so talented across the league. You're not going to be able to completely nerf scoring to like where it was in the early 2000s when they first, got rid of illegal defense. But if you allow defenders to be entitled to your space and you're not, gifting these talented offensive players extra possessions at the free throw line and really giving them the freedom of movement, just let guys earn it. That's all I want to see. That's all anybody wants to see. I love how playoff basketball is officiated. Just do that for the regular season. Like, I think it's so straightforward.
I think so as well. And it has gotten out of control this year to some degree. And I'm going to be interested to see how that plays out, especially, there are some big games coming up for the Celtics here against some stout defenses. Denver switched well against them last time they played them. That's a big one coming up on Thursday. Phoenix, not a great defense, but they do have some frontline size. So I'm a little interested in that one. Again, there's not much that the Celtics have to prove down the stretch of the season. They're going to be the 1 seed. They're going to be the favorite in the East. And they're probably the odds-on favorite to win the championship here. Yeah. But I just still have that pause, Justin, and it's hard to escape it with games like this. Like, you go into Sunday's game, 11th straight win over the Warriors, who were relatively healthy, like no Wiggins and all that, and you just blow them off the floor, and with no Porzingis, look like an unstoppable force. And at that point, you're just sitting there, if you're someone who's tried to be a little bit of a skeptic like me, and they're just like, what can you even nitpick at this point? Yeah. And this game showed some of those things, like the offensive lulls. They can get into those. They can get stagnant in those situations. The crunch time's a little bit better this year, but it's still a little bit of an issue here. And what I thought showed in this game too, a little bit, just a tiny issue, but again, you're just searching for little things here that might prevent them from winning a championship. When they switch, like they did late, they get a little susceptible to the offensive reboundings, and that put back by Wade there was a big play down the stretch with Porzingis playing up. So again, those are just small things, but I'm looking for something because as great as they've been this year, I know you're probably going to laugh because of the things you've watched in Cleveland and, what normal teams have to deal with. I have a little bit of pause picking them to win it all. And maybe some of it's just what we saw last year. Maybe some of it's just what we've seen across multiple seasons now with this team, despite how good they've looked in the regular season.
I'm going to call you a coward.
I'm just
going to call you
out.
A coward right here. I'm going to call you a coward right here in front of your viewers. No, Boston is that damn good. Like, I
should be believing.
You should be believing. And I've done that emotionally too, where, I set expectations a little bit lower, like, and that way your favorite team has a chance to exceed them and you're not going to be let down. Like, different people experience fandom in different ways. No, this Celtics team is that damn good. It's the best starting 5 in the NBA. Like, you can pick nits, but the reality is, since the 2017 Warriors, there are no perfect basketball teams. There are no teams where it's like, okay, there isn't an obvious flaw. They're going to go out and win. Like, so often winning and losing, like, people will talk about it like it's something genetic. Like, do you have the clutch gene? Do you have the winning gene? Blah, blah, blah. No, really, when it comes to today's NBA, where there's so much parity, there's so many talented teams, it's going to come down to execution. Obviously, there's a luck component when it comes to shooting variance and whatnot, but Boston absolutely has enough to win. And beyond that, I think they should be the title favorite. Like, I think when you look at the state of the Eastern Conference, where everyone but them is banged up and probably isn't going to be, at full stride heading into the playoffs, even if they do get healthy, that's going to make things easier. They're still going to have to go out and earn it. But like, that starting 5 is so damn good. I think, Derek White and Drew Holiday, that tandem is terrific. They gave Darius Garland hell as kind of the lone ball handler a lot of the time. And, even just the rim protection, like the Cavs, one of the things that's impressed me for the Cavs, and this definitely wasn't the case last year, is like they've managed to stay with Boston from a 3-point shooting standpoint and actually outshoot them in a couple of these matchups. That was never even a possibility last year from 3. And it just goes to show you, the change in personnel and whatnot. But Boston's rim protection was outstanding. Like, there was that stretch where Luke Cornett just ruined everybody's lives. Frankly, that was the worst Evan Mobley game of the season by a very, very, very wide margin.
Celtics have found ways to make him look bad.
Yeah, he really struggled. I think he was pressing in that one. We've seen it in some of these matchups where he's trying to do a little bit too much, like in isolation and stuff like that, and also working his way back and trying to find that rhythm. But that was easily the worst game that he has played all season. But I think the rim protection is outstanding, and you have depth with rim protection too, right? Like even though I think Cornette going in drop hurt them a little later in the games, his ability to really take away the rim, Porzingis, Horford, all these guys that are able to do that, it really kind of forces teams to beat you from the outside. And that was never an option for the Cavs in the past. They did a good job of it last night. But again, like I think if that was a playoff like atmosphere where Boston's locked in, we're not having these conversations. We're not picking these nits. It comes down to execution. And as long as Boston's executing at a high level and, they don't get bad luck with injuries or like some outlandish shooting variants, I think they're going to win a championship.
Uh, I'll be there soon. I'll meet you there soon. I got to see a little bit more down the stretch
I'm
here in
just
some
going to
of these
keep
bigger
bugging you. I'm
games.
just going to keep bugging you until then.
And again, I hate to hold out, but like I think you described it perfectly there. You set the expectations a little lower, not just because you don't want to be disappointed, but because with this team, we've seen them look really, really good in other seasons, and something just happens in the playoffs. And I don't think it'll happen in the East this time. I don't think the Cavs could
No,
beat them over 7. I just don't think they have the offensive personnel top to bottom to kind of stand with them in some of those track meets. The Heat this year, I know they've had their number, but the Celtics have just
I
demolished them
just
in
don't.
those
I just
games.
don't. I just don't think they're as good of a team this year. Like I know they're doing the same zombie heat routine, and I understand the trauma of what happened in the finals against the Warriors. And yeah, there were some injuries. Tatum wasn't fully healthy there. But I think that this is a better Celtics team. I'm not going to forgive you guys to losing to the Warriors because prior to that occurring, I would always be able to lean back on. Well, yeah, Steph won that one finals with everybody hurt, and then the other two were KD. You gave them that validating one, and I will never forgive you guys for that. But I think you can move past that trauma. This is a better team. This is a more experienced team.
It's a different team, too.
This is a team that's gone through that. Tatum and Brown have gone through that. And that's one of the most important things. Like, I think it's one of the flaws of how the media talks about basketball in general is it's a, common knowledge that when a young team goes into the playoffs, they're going to embarrass themselves at some point. Experience is going to matter. It doesn't matter what the regular season numbers were. I was saying that routinely last year, that the Cavs, even though they had the net rating and all the advanced stats of a contender, that they were going to embarrass themselves at some point in the playoffs. I just thought it was going to happen later than it did. But that's a thing young teams go through. I think OKC is going to go through it too. But all of those failings, all those shortcomings are things that you can draw upon. Like that's the documentary stuff when you watch something like The Dynasty and you see how or The Last Dance, where you fail, but you learn from all of those experiences. You make the necessary roster adjustments. I think Boston's a team that has the experience. I think they have the top end talent. I think they've made the right roster moves to get them there. I don't think you have to be concerned about that same stuff. It's really just going to come down to, are we playing Boston Celtics basketball?
Yeah, and they've been able to do that on this recent stretch. I was very impressed. I mean, they're relentless attacking mismatches. If you have anybody on the court who can be exposed, they're going to expose them. And then on the other end, they're going to brutally ignore guys who can't make you pay in ways that completely swallow up the Stars. And I know the Warriors want to make all those excuses after Sunday, but they had Curry wrapped up. They had Chris Paul wrapped up in ways that I hadn't seen this season from them. I mean, 4 points from Curry, 2 points from Paul. They weren't able to do anything out there, and a lot of it was because you had the Quinoneses and Moody's and other guys out there who just really couldn't make them pay.
Yeah.
And Cavaliers did a better job of making them pay with those guys. Wade was great making shots away from that pressure.
Mm.
Garland navigated both ends really well. Allen survived some of the switches, and they just showed that they can hang. And I think we'll talk about their playoff chances a little bit later in the show, but I think it's a good statement by them there that they can match up at least in this game. And they got overwhelmed a little bit at times through the middle portions of this game, but when it mattered down the stretch and in those December games, I thought they could hang around, and that's all you can really ask against this level of talent when it's fully healthy, when this team's fully healthy, when they have everybody out there and rolling. Real quick, want to give a shout out to our new sponsor here, PrizePicks. Check them out. Head over there, download the app. Really enjoyable experience. We've done it after the last couple games, or before the last couple games here, picking some over unders with guys. Making our lineups. And again, right now they are offering up to 100% deposit match, up to $100. What is PrizePicks? It's the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. The easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy. It's just you against the numbers. Tatum over 24.5. Curry over 23.5 on that game Sunday. I wasn't able to get that. He comes out with 4. But again, it's fun stuff before these games. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more or less than 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. So go to prizepicks.com/CLNS and just use our code CLNS. It's hard to miss the code thing here. First deposit match up to $100. They're going to match 100% of that. That's prizepicks.com/CLNS. Use the code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. So check them out right now. Been enjoying trying them out so far. And as we continue here, the microscope, as you talked about, Justin, there, it's been placed on Tatum fairly, and I think he's come through in a lot of ways this year. I think he does deserve some level of consideration in MVP. I don't think he'll win it. Jokic just has that staggering of a hold over it, and maybe that changes over the last month and change here. But right now, I don't think it's much of a race. Shea, I think you have to give some deference just given what he's working with around him. That young team that was not in the playoffs a year ago is now the 2 seed. That's tough to argue against. But I think anyone else, you can make the argument from Tatum's standpoint with statistics and with what I do think is a pretty strong argument that he's the best player on the best team by miles above anybody else. And if that lead builds down the stretch of the season, great. So does that get him third place? Like, I think that's great. You don't really get remembered from that, but it is something of a statement and accomplishment, especially in this loaded race with a guy like Jokic doing the stuff he's doing at the top. I think that's what you settle on. I don't think there's a real path to him winning it with the style he's playing. And, people have made a big deal about that. Maybe he's getting penalized for the stats and the sacrifices and all the rest, but I don't think even if he tried, he could do what Jokic is doing. So it is what it is there. What have you made of his season and his performance down the stretch of this game?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think he deserves to be in the MVP race, and that comes with responsibilities, right? Like, you're going to be under the microscope. You're going to get scrutiny when you come up short in games like this. Again, it goes back to what I said earlier about I felt like there was just a little bit too much stagnation from Boston in their late game execution. I think you want to, even if it's just like a Tatum and White 2-man action or something along those lines, like just something to get him going where it's not as much of an isolation possession, or if it is an ISO possession that you're at least attacking a destabilized defense first. But yeah, he deserves to be in the MVP consideration. I'm a big believer that team success should be a factor in this kind of thing. Like, I disagreed with Scotty Barnes making the All-Star team on a bad team where, you look at the on-off splits, and despite how bad they are, they're better with him on the bench. Like, that was frustrating to me. I thought someone like Jared Allen deserved it more, especially when you're talking about such an NBA that's so loaded with talent. Guys are going to be putting up numbers on every single team because someone's got to do it, and you should reward the guys that are, doing that with talent around them. And I think for Boston to add as much talent as they did, and Tatum's numbers have taken a small hit, but I think he's playing better basketball. Like, I don't think it should just be about the box score at the end of the day, right? Like, being able to maintain similar numbers with more talent around you, I think that's actually an improvement in a way. Like, one of the examples of that would be like last year with the Cavs, right? Like, the fact that Darius Garland's scoring remained identical, even though you're adding Donovan Mitchell to the equation, like, that's something that I consider to be growth, even though statistically it's not growth, right? Like, so I think Tatum definitely falls into that category, and it's tough. I would give it to him over Shea.
Really?
I know OKC has taken a big leap this season, but a big part of why they're taking a leap from lower depths is because they've artificially kept themselves at that, right? Like Chet missed last year. Anytime Shea is banged up, you're resting him to get higher lotto position and all that kind of stuff. Williams missed some time and whatnot, right? Like they've done a lot of things to deflate their numbers in the past, and now we got a healthy roster. We've
So you
got
could
more
see Tatum
supporting cast.
being runner up.
You might hate me for this, but well, honestly, I can see him being runner up because Giannis might miss some time with the Achilles here. But
You'd go
um,
Giannis over Tatum, I
I
guess, with the finish
think
here, but man,
I
they've been
might.
bad.
That's my big thing. Like I think Boston should be rewarded because they're the better team, but Giannis is also arguably having the best season of his career. So that's one of those tough things to balance of how much do you put on him? How much do you put on, um team
Coaches.
success? Like, yeah, like I frankly, like it's just not a subject that I've given a ton of time to think about. So these are half-baked takes here because
Yeah.
I think Donovan Mitchell should be in the conversation for MVP, but I'm not sitting here like doing a league podcast where I'm really like diving into this sort of thing. So I definitely think, Tatum should get that kind of credit. And the most important thing, like, I've talked about this before, when people get obsessed with rankings and things like that and who's top 10 and who's not, the most important thing is are you good enough to be the best player at your position in a playoff series, or are you able to be the best player in a playoff series period, right? Like Kyrie as an example, no one would ever put him above Steph Curry, but he was able to go out there and outplay Steph in multiple final series, right? Like the best player isn't always going to have the best series, but if you can at least hold your own at a given position against another star, that's the important thing. Like that's the model for the Cavs. Like they're probably like, Darius isn't going to be the best point guard in every single series, but I think if he gets back into his rhythm and he reaches his potential, he's that type of guy that can outplay a guard in another series. Donovan's that kind of guy. Mobley, Allen, all those guys can play like that at that level. So when you have someone like Jason Tatum, that's another echelon where I think he can just flat out be the best player in a series. He can take over a series, but it's just going to be about whether or not he does it.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier 1 of 6 late on those like final 10-second shots this year. The
Yeah.
numbers overall the last handful of years here, though, and I remember seeing something like this semi recently, like within the last 3 years. If you stack it up against the other stars, it actually is solid to like above average what he's doing in those spots. And he gets a ton
Yeah.
of opportunities. He's shooting more of those shots than anybody else, which I guess speaks back to the predictability of them late in games, as you mentioned. But I'm going to try to toss these up here. And we're using a new platform here, so we'll see how this goes.
Yeah.
This is
I will
from,
say for the most part, as you throw that up, like a lot of the clutch stats, it's all such a small sample that I don't really know what you can do with it. Like I remember, I think it was back in like 2009 or 2010, maybe even 2011, where Tom Haberstroh had a stat where it was like Kobe's had more air balls on last second shots than made shots. Like, you just remember the makes and whatnot. And it's
and I think
always in
people
such a small
forget
sample.
the
Yeah. Go
degree of
ahead.
difficulty in these spots too.
Right.
Getting a shot off, the defense being set so often, doubles coming in these spots to get you off the ball. So it's a high degree of difficulty. So what's actually a good percentage in these spots? I think you have to recalibrate a little bit. And when you start to look at some of these numbers here, you realize why. Like these are some big time clutch players like Luka. You think of him being one of the better guys in that spot, and he is at 21%. LeBron, like a staggeringly bad number there. And this is over the last 5 seasons with these guys apparently here. So since 2019, 2020, Tatum's 10 of 36. That's the most makes in the league in those situations with 5 seconds left in the fourth or overtime to tie or take the lead. And one of the better percentages at 28%. Jimmy's 20% here. Booker's 21%. Trey actually has a pretty solid number here, as well as Murray. Shea, really good, but
Hmm.
nearly 20 fewer attempts than Tatum. Curry solid, but again, 20 fewer attempts. So it's all in the 20s and 30s here. So Tatum's really not different than any of these guys, except for the fact that he is routinely getting these shots. So maybe you get away from him a little bit in that spots, but when you have the production like that, you get why Joe's just kind of tossing him the ball in that spot to try to get something off.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. It's
The possession last night was bad, though. I mean, he was like digging
yeah.
into two guys, took 19 dribbles, and then just tossed up a fadeaway over two guys that really had no chance.
That's the thing, right? Like how possessions get classified, like what gets called an ISO, what gets called all this different stuff. Like it really, even within that, it varies so much. And like I think that's one of those spots where you have to go to the eye test. And I have no problem with Tatum getting that shot. It's just about, you know, making things a little bit easier for him and not going pure hero ball. Because I definitely felt like things were
Right,
very
because there's
hero
a
ball
difference in
heavy.
what they do all game to that point to go up by 20
Yeah.
compared to what they're doing down the stretch there. And
Right.
that's,
Yeah.
I think, frustrated fans for years with this team.
And even, you know, apologies for always doing this, but I always lean on my experience as a fan. But like the Cavs, when they won the championship, they did a fair amount of isolation, but a lot of the time, you know, it was a two-man action, Kyrie and LeBron screening. Like Kyrie would screen for LeBron because they knew that the switch was coming. So, you know, you're either getting Kyrie on a small forward he could blow by, or LeBron on, switched on to Steph, or whatever the case may be. Like just simple little things like that that it's not a big complicated action when everybody's tired and you're not going to run it. Like that's, I think that's another factor when you get to these late game possessions is guys are so gassed that if you're running a set but it's at 80% speed, a lot of the times the defense can stick with that and blow it up. But I still think you can kind of run those little actions to just create an advantage, something that's not too complicated, that's not going to generate a turnover, but is at least going to make things easier. I think that's the sweet spot. And again, I've I've watched maybe, you know, 10, 15 Celtics games and they've looked awesome in the majority of them. So I don't have like macro concerns here, but you know, that's just one of those things that you can kind of learn from this experience.
Well, let's go to one example we're familiar with from, what was this last year? November 2022, early last season. I think down two late in the game. They put Tatum in the backcourt. They inbounded to Smart, did like Tatum running downhill, a little handoff play, and he blew by everybody for a big dunk on Allen that, some people thought should have been and one there on that
Hmm.
play. And then it went to overtime and Celtics lost that game, but a really good play in that spot to get him an easier look at the basket rather than just a fadeaway jump shot over, someone in his face. Similar play to beat Philly last year, really the same exact play where they handed it off to Smart for a three that beat Philadelphia on the road in that game last year. So I think that's what people are looking for a little bit, a little more variety from their late game sets, a little more speed, certainly. And I put that on Tatum rather than Joe in that spot. I know Joe
Yeah.
tried to call timeout with 4 seconds last night, but I don't know what that would have done. They did that against Denver in the first game. I don't know if you caught that one, and it just ended up being like a Tatum desperation heave anyway from the mid range in that game. They just got to speed it up. They just got to run the offense in a manner more like how they do for the rest of the game because this offense is great. They have a lot of options. They can go to Porzingis. Brown in this spot's 2 of 12, according to the numbers I pulled up, too. So you can try to go to him as well, but if it's the same thing, you're probably going to get the same result in those spots. So
Yeah.
we'll wrap this up with some Cavs talk as they head to the playoffs here. You talk injuries. It's been tough for them to get these guys together for a lot of this year. But does the results here, the depth that they've added, Strus didn't play this game as well. I've really liked his fit with this team this year.
Yeah, he's been great.
He had that heave the other night against Dallas that won that game. I like this team. I did last year. I was shocked they lost round one. And again, bad matchup, really good team, Brunson, all the rest. I'm believing again here, I think. From what I've seen, from their ability to win games with guys down, that Garland Mobley stretch was so impressive. Allen's
Yeah.
playing at another level this year. And now, Mitchell hopefully gets healthy for this stretch run and is kind of the guy leading the charge here down the stretch of the season. More wing depth, more wing interchangeability at that spot, depending on what you need. So I at least have them moving on beyond round one this year, depending on the
Yeah.
matchup here. Can you dream of an East Finals run against a team like the Celtics here?
I mean that should be the goal. Like to
Right.
me, again, my biggest concern right now is they're just not going to get healthy in time. They're not going to get to a rhythm, and we're going to go into a playoff or come out of a playoff series where, we just don't have good data. And I think that's really, frustrating from a team building standpoint when you got some tough questions. I think at this point, I have no real concerns about Donovan Mitchell. Like, I think he's going to be coming back. I feel like there's going to be an extension. And, if you reevaluate in 2 years, you do. But you look at like the moves that the Knicks did to get rid of every young asset they have. Miami moved one of their only 2 first-round picks. Like, I don't think those teams are making those kind of moves if they feel like Donovan Mitchell is going to be available on the trade market, because they took themselves out of the running, right? But I do feel better about their ability in the playoffs. Like, they're a deep team, right? Like, even having someone like Sam Merrill coming in off the bench that can light it up, like, that's tremendously helpful. And last year, I'm not going to sit here and, complain that, the casual fan isn't aware of like every little nuance that's going on with a team like the Cavs that largely flies under the radar. But you go into a playoff series where Dean Wade's recovering from a torn shoulder and can't lift his right arm above his shoulder without an extreme amount of pain. He's not helpful. You see what a healthy Dean Wade does to the team right when he's out there. Isaac Okoro missed a month straight prior to the playoffs and was questionable for game 1, playing through a lot of pain with a knee injury, and then gets re-injured in game 1 again. So you had a top-heavy team that had just made a consolidation trade, and 2 of your best guys coming in off the bench, Dean Wade and Isaac Okoro, were non-factors. Then you have, Jetty Osman, who's a defensive liability. You have Danny Green with a torn leg, right? Like, it's just such a different team when you have Max Strus, George Niang, Sam Merrill, Isaac Okoro, who's made a leap this season.
Don't forget Lamar Stevens.
Yeah, well, yeah, not the greatest options. Let's just stick here. So I feel a lot better about their ability in the playoffs as long as they are healthy. And also, like, it's going to depend on matchups. Like, there's a lot of weird things happening here. Like, if Joel Embiid is back and you're playing Philly first round,
right now it'd be Cleveland, Miami, which would be a slugfest to say the least.
Like right now, I think Cleveland fully healthy. I think Cleveland, New York, and Milwaukee are in the same tier, and your order will be based on how much you value experience or the best player in the series or what happened in last year's playoffs, right? But like, I think any of those teams can easily advance to the Eastern Conference Finals, or I can see the path to it. So it'll be interesting to see if they can get healthy in time. It'll be interesting to see how they navigate these injuries, how long Donovan Mitchell misses. They have a very, very, very tough schedule to close out the year. So that's one of those things that gives me trepidation. They got, 13 games in a row over the span of a month here where they're not going to be playing the same city twice. They have a lot of travel. That's not good for a team that's dealing with injuries and is trying to, feel better physically. So getting a win like they did against Boston, I think, is incredibly important. You need to bank those wins. And, if they can go just above 500 here, the rest of the way, you're looking at 52, 53 win season. I think given the number of injuries they've had, that goes to show that this is a well-built team that, is heading in the right direction.
Yeah, and there's a big picture conversation we can have another day. But I do generally believe in that if you're going to be a higher seed here, you're probably going to have a better chance of moving on. And they put themselves in that position with what they've done to this roster this year. So enormous amount of credit there. They are in that weird spot, as you mentioned, of potentially drawing New York again, Miami, tricky, Philly, depending on who they have, challenging. Even the Pacers, if they are that 7th seed, look a little more dangerous than they appear on paper, the record there. So there's some teams from like 4 to 8 there that could be a challenge round 1, and that's why I like where the Celtics have put themselves, because I really think it's going to be like a Chicago, Atlanta, maybe even Brooklyn style, like first round sweep that they put themselves in position to pull off here. And if you remember last year, they were the 2, and I know they avoided Miami, which really could have been a disaster, but they still ended up in like this 6-game slog against Atlanta round 1. So that's another difference over last year that I think they have going for themselves right now. And they are going to potentially play a finals preview on Thursday, late night edition of the Garden Report coming your way. I think it's a 10 o'clock tip off between those two. So we'll be live after midnight, certainly, here on the East Coast. So check us out then. I'm back on the show tomorrow night. So I will be there alongside some others from the cast. I'm not sure exactly who, but we will see you then. And one more shout out quick to our sponsor, PrizePicks. Check them out and get a 100% matching bonus on your deposit up to $100. Just pick a couple guys. Great experience doing that. Any stat category. Great daily fantasy experience over there. So go check them out at PrizePicks. He is Justin Rowan, always a good friend of the Garden Report. Check his Chase Down podcast out, and I hope you feel better soon, man. That is an ugly injury.
It's it has definitely been a bit of a journey. I had a positive checkup on Monday.
How long has it been?
It's 3 weeks. Three weeks since I tore my Achilles. As I said, it was on a hook shot. It was my first time playing or pickup basketball since the pandemic, and I had stretched, I had done yoga and everything, and it just exploded on me on my first shot of the run. Miserable, but I actually learned through this experience. I when I was down on the ground, I was like, God, I got to go under the knife again. This sucks. I learned that there's a non-surgical route, and that's the route that I went. The doctor says, hey, your Achilles has attached itself back to the heel, and I'm on the right path here. So I avoided surgery, even though it was a complete rupture. So that's a lot of fun. I'm starting to gain mobility, and that's great to see.
Well, that's good news. And guess this is the last Cavs Celtics of the year, right? So nothing till the playoffs. We'll keep tabs on them. Of course, check out his coverage over there at the Chase Down and at Twitter at CavsOnida. And maybe this will be the first year since 18 with Celtics Cavs, I want to say.
Yeah.
So it's been a little while here, and it'd be a good one again, I think, between these two teams.
Hopefully it would go as long as that one did.
That one's still a sore spot for me if you want to talk about sore spots.
I believe that. I definitely believe that. You want to talk about series you guys shouldn't have lost? That is near the top of the list.
Speaking of that, I interviewed Kyrie for the first time last week. Pretty good experience. He seems to be in a good place.
I'm happy to hear that. I'm always rooting for former Cavs, no matter how weird things get.
Yeah, and I think for the first time ever since it happened, I saw the slightest bit of, all right, we're over it from Celtics fans too, especially when they saw his comments after that game. So maybe some healing going on there as well to connect us again there. But he's Justin. Check out Chase Down. Check us out tomorrow night, and I will see you then. Good night, everybody.